There's a famous Gemara in Psachim, Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis, regarding the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, regarding the mitzvah of giving up one's life, being moser nefesh for Kiddush Hashem. So the Gemara makes an interesting drasha. The Gemara asks, how did Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah know that they could jump into the Kivshan Eish? So the Gemara says, interesting, they learned it out from the frogs. A pasuk in this week's PARSHA, PARSHA Ve'ira, it says the frogs went betanu recha. They went into the ovens. Why did they go into the ovens for? They're going to die. Why not go for the cake, go in for the chips? So it must be that they were allowed to go al Kiddush Hashem. So a very strange source the Gemara brings down. We know there's a pasuk in Parashas Emor. We learn out the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. V'niknashti b'soch b'nei Yisrael. Why does the Gemara say that Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah learned out the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem from the frogs? So why not quote this the pasuk in Chumash? So we know, in general, there are three mitzvahs one has to give up their life for. If someone puts a gun to your head and says worship idols, commit illicit relations, adultery, or to murder someone, one has a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. One has a mitzvah to sanctify their life, to give up their life, and not do the big three. But save the big three, we know b'chai b'hem. There's 610 mitzvahs. You have to sacrifice. You don't have to give up your life for, like Shabbos. For Shabbos, when he says Shabbos, and even though that's what the Gemara in Yuma, Peheg, marshals many sources why Pikuach Nefesh is Docha Shabbos. Because Shabbos is compared to Avodah Zarah, but we assume halach it's not in terms of the mitzvah of Yavor. And save the big three, only the big three, one has the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. For the rest of the Torah, it's v'chai b'hem. And however, for Shara Averos, so there's a discussion, but Shara Averos we say is a mitzvah of v'chai b'hem. And the Gemara gives different exceptions. Certain times, one has an obligation to go al Kiddush Hashem, even if it's not, if it's a time of, again, discussion. The Rishonim, but if it's before Hesia and it's Shara and it's Shas SHMOT, even if it's not the big three, if it's time of religious persecution or it's happening in public, then one does have a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. So Tosfos quotes Rabbeinu Tam. So how do you explain how Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were able to be moser nefesh al Kiddush Hashem? How could they give up their life? So Tosfos writes, it wasn't, and the question is, why does the Gemara need a source from the frogs? Why not just learn it out simply from the regular pasuk? So Tosfos answers, it's not Avodah Zarah at all. It was just that statue was covered l'melech, it was covered to the king, and therefore, and that's what we learn out from the frogs. In other words, if it was Avodah Zarah, so obviously they have to give up their life. If it wasn't Avodah Zarah, so the Chiddush of the frogs, and even though it was only Kaveh LaMelech, they still were able to go ahead and go al Kiddush Hashem. And that's what the Chiddush we learn. So we learn out from Rabbeinu Tam that you have a right to go, just like the frogs weren't obligated, they had a right to, so too Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah didn't have to, because it wasn't Avodah Zarah, but they learned out from this, like the frogs didn't have to go into the ovens, they didn't have to. It wasn't the classical case of Avodah Zarah. And the Re says another answer. No. Hayalol of Roach. The question is, let's say, of course, if you're forced to worship idols, so then you have a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. But let's say you know that pending danger is coming, and you have time to run away. Clearly, you're allowed to run away. The question is, are you allowed to stay? So the Re apparently learning from, Daniel, that how do you allow to stay in? So we see from the frogs that just like the frogs opted to go Mesiras Nefesh, they didn't go into the cake, they went into the ovens, so too we have a right. So Machlokes, Rabbeinu Tam and the Re, why did Chananya, Mishael, Azariah, what's the chiddush that we're going out from the frogs? Either according to Rabbeinu Tam, the chiddush is it wasn't really Avodah Zarah, and it was only covered Malchus, and therefore so it wasn't a chiyuv. So therefore they can't learn it out from Kiddush Hashem. And according to the Re, maybe it was Avodah Zarah, but Hayalol of Roach, that's what we learned out. They could have ran away before and they didn't, so that's permissible. So let's try to understand this machlokes a little more between Rabbeinu Tam and the Re, in terms of why Hananya, Mishael, Azariah, how the Gemara learns it out from the frogs. So there's another famous machlokes, Rambam and the Bali Tosas. Tosas and Avodah Zarah discusses the following case. So we know for the big three you give up your life. What if it's not the big three? Let's say someone wants you to machal Shabbos, they want you to eat non-kosher or whatever avera they want. So clearly you're not obligated to give up your life. The question is, are you allowed to? Am I allowed to be moser nefesh, not to keep Shabbos or not to keep Shabbos or to keep kashrus? So Tosas says there's no chiyav. The big three you have a chiyav. The other ones you have a choice. And the Rambam writes in Yisodei Torah, he says no. The mitzvah v'chai b'hem teaches me if there's no obligation to give up your life, then it's usher to. So you have a fundamental machlokes, the Bali Tosfos and Avodah Zarah, Daf Rav Zayin, and the Rambam in Yisodei Torah, whether someone in Shara Averas, it's not the big three, whether one who goes ahead and is Moser Nefesh anyway, according to Tosas, he's still Nikra Kadosh, he's still considered someone who went out Kiddush Hashem. But according to the Rambam, he's Nischayev B'nafsho. So that's a general machlokes, Rambam and Tosas. However, the Achronim point out, the Mishnah Lamelech and others point out, but what does that mean? Tosas has said you can give up your life for anything. Because a person's hungry, and they say, I want you to cook me a steak on Shabbos. You don't want to give up your life. So the Mishnah Lamelech says, even according to Tosas would be agreed. You can't just give up your life if it's Lahanas Atzmo. If a guy is doing it for his own Hana. It's only if it's Lahavir al Adas, that's what the Mishnah Lamelech writes, then Tosas would agree. In other words, it's not, let's say a person's a chola on Shabbos. You say, you know what? I'm not calling the doctor. I'm not going to the hospital. I'm not driving a car. I'm not making a phone call. So the Rambam writes, so Arizim is chayav d'nafsho, obviously. You're going to Tosas, it's okay. You're a kadosh? Of course not. So there's a famous Radbaz. He quotes from one of the Bali Tosas, the Riva, who was once a chola mesukin on Yom Kippur, and the doctor said, if you don't eat, you're going to die. And he didn't eat, and he died. So he asked the Radbaz, like, how could he do it? So of course he was wrong, most don't assume. But Radbaz answers, in other words, what was the logic of the Riva, whether we accept the logic of the Riva or not, but why did the Riva do it? is because the Riva he realized he was going to die anyway. He didn't die from starvation. He died from another sickness, and he realized eating, but even if he ate on Yom Kippur, he was still going to die, so therefore he'd rather not eat. So but PARSHA, obviously if you have a chiyuv to eat on Yom Kippur, you have to. It's not a kadosh, it's not like you have an option. So that's what the Shita Mukubetis quotes from the Ra'ah, Pshat and Rabbeinu Tam, that the kasha is, we said, according to Rabbeinu Tam, why did they go down from frogs? Because it wasn't really Avodah Zarah. So if it wasn't really Avodah Zarah, so how could you give up your life al Kiddush Hashem? I can't just, even Tosas agrees that you can't just give up your life for no reason. That's what the Ra'ah points out. Even though Me'ikar Adin, it wasn't Avodah Zarah, if you ask the king why he made it, he just made it, they made it a covered malchus, but the perception was by the people that it was Avodah Zarah. So therefore, even though technically it wasn't, but since it already had the perception of Avodah Zarah, so then Tosas would say you have a mitzvah, one could be a kadosh by being moser nefesh. If you give up your life in a situation where it appears it's Avodah Zarah, you're not mechuyev to, but then and perhaps we could say the Mefarshim say that even according to the Rambam would agree in this type of scenario, sometimes you have an option of giving up your life. In other words, as the Buka Yosef writes, that there are many sources we find the people being moser nefesh. The Gemara by Mila, Elisha Bal Kanafayim was willing to give up his life hiding for tefillin, etc. So, and as they point out, even the Rambam is a mode of Hashat Tzrichalo, like we find by the Makoshesh Eitzim, Tosas pointed out above him, who's the Makoshesh Eitzim was Shein Shamayim Nitzcham, he was a tzaddik. He wanted to save Chai, so it was right after the sin of the Meraglim. The Jews thought they were going to be destroyed. So they went ahead and they thought they'd be destroyed. So they went ahead and the Jews thought, so they went ahead and he went ahead with Machal Shabbos in the Midbar, and therefore he was killed by the Eidim. But so the same type of thing, even the Rambam, we know that in cases where Gedolim decide Hashat Tzrichalo, they need chizuk in certain things that you're allowed to give up your life al Kiddush Hashem. So let's summarize, and we'll have to continue discussing this issue more. But the Gemara Psachim learns out that how the Chanani Mishav Azar, you know, they can go Kiddush Hashem. They learned it out from the frogs, and the frogs went into the ovens. Why quote from the frogs? Why quote from the frogs? Because you have a pasuk in the Torah. So Tosas writes, Rabbi Tam, it wasn't Avodah Zarah. It was only covered malchus. If it wasn't Avodah Zarah, then how were they allowed to do it? We'll have to see why were they allowed to do it. And according to the Ri, it was Avodah Zarah, but the Shai was Hayolu of Roach, that they chose to stay. We know in general there's a machokes, the Rambam and the Bali Tosas, whether someone that's not the big three, can you give up your life? So according to Tosas, you can still be called a Kodesh. According to the Rambam, your Harizan is Chayim ben Nafsho. But the Mishnah Melech and others point out that even the Rambam would agree, or even Tosas would agree, you can't just give up your life for no reason. You can't, if I'm a Chol Mesukin, I can't just say, well, I'm not desecrating Shabbos or Yom Kippur, like we had the case of the Riva. So that's what they point out, that really it was the Torah HaMelech, so therefore it really should be used to, even according to Tosas. But that wasn't the perception. They thought it was Avodah Zarah, hence Chananya Mishav Azariah did it. It was no Avodah Zarah, but it was an aspect that at least they had the option to opt in. And we said even the Rambam who normally is very strict, would also agree. And if the Ri is Yachol of Roach, there was Avodah Zarah, and they learned that from the frogs, if the frogs could have ran away, could have went to the cake, they opted in, so too Hanan Mishav Azaya opted in instead of running away.